welcome back.
And it's now 6 minutes away from 7 o'clock. We're moving into our conversation for today, and we're talking about exploration zones, and we've been joined by the director of the Coalition to Save Our Natural Heritage, Tanya Williams. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning, William, and thank you very much. Morning, Marilyn.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much. It's been a while.
I know. This has been a conversation that has been going on for quite some time. When you saw this recent draft and it being shared with the NGO community, what was your response at that juncture?
Our response is the same that it has been since about 2011. In 2012, we did an analysis of the zonation framework, and we provided the recommendations out of that analysis to the Ministry of Energy, actually to the Minister, and also to the Minister of Fisheries, Forestry and Sustainable Development. However, and we have been advocating for uptake of those recommendations. However, when you look at the draft that was submitted first in October, I believe, of last year, and January of this year, nothing has changed. There has not been any uptake of any input from the Belize Coalition to Save Our Natural Heritage, and I would believe from no other NGO, because it's the same document that has been in existence since maybe 2012.
Now, a big part of it at this point, even on the heels of the recent release coming out of the ministry, is it's just a draft. But what has been the process in terms of dealing with drafts and submitting comments?
I take it that it's just a draft, but this draft has been in consultation, I would say, from 2011. At what point do you say, I will input the recommendations of the people who I'm supposed to be consulting with? At what point do you do that? I think that is the uproar that is happening right now in the NGO community. Why are we still here? Why are we still at this point where you have not looked at basic things like the methodology, which is what we had an issue with from the beginning? If you look at the document, there's no methodology in it, and I believe there's a reason for that. That has been the point of contention. How do you get a zonation? How do you get to the point of zonation when there are issues with the basic premise of getting to that zonation? So we understand that it's just a draft, but at some point you must say, I will take up the recommendations. We will discuss the recommendations of those who we are consulting with.
Now, this is a part of the issue that the NGO community has definitely been sounding the alarm about. And while the government's response for a while had been, well, we had consulted with these NGOs, your issue is that they haven't taken anything into consideration. Given that experience and the new February 2nd deadline, are you optimistic at all that any position put forward, comments put forward at this point would be acknowledged or included in the draft, in the actual guideline?
I must note that they have changed the deadline to March 22nd now.
Okay.
We are always hopeful that consultation is true consultation and not what we consider to be tokenism, where we will say, I can say, Marlene, how do you like my dress? And you might say, Tanya, you shouldn't wear that dress today. And William come and say, did you talk to Marlene about that dress? And I'll say, yeah, talk to her. But that's the end of it. I don't say what you said. I don't say what I considered your recommendation to be to me.
You still do what you want anyway.
You still do what I want anyway. So I believe that if there's true consultation after the March 22nd deadline, and we again submit the comments that we have been submitting from 2012, including with the new comments for the guidelines, which is fairly new. After March 22nd, the next draft should not be this what we're saying today. And so we are hopeful that that's the case, and I believe because we are now engaging the public, that government will feel pressured to input those recommendations.
Now, what are, let's go back and look at what are some of the fundamental areas that the coalition has issues with when it comes to what's being presented in the draft. Obviously, you flagged methodology as one of the primary. Are there other fundamental issues built into the draft as it now stands?
The methodology is really the issue, because what they did was to come up with a ranking for different areas. But there are things that are missing. For example, when you look at the offshore doesn't have any buffers around critical ecosystems, including World Heritage Site, including tourism sites, including fisheries site. What we have done with our research is that we found that Generally, there is a buffer between all activities and any critical ecosystems. The range is normally about 120 to 250 miles. There are no buffers in this zonation, none at all. When we applied a buffer of, I believe, 31 miles, it actually made the offshore off limits to all exploration. I believe there is, I want to say that maybe there's just a lack of information on the government's part that they don't know that you should put buffers. But having seen the recommendations from us, why are those buffers not included? I believe, however, that the World Heritage Center will be asking government to look at buffers when it comes to World Heritage sites. So that's important. Another issue that we have is that there seems to be an arbitrary application of ranking.
This is the map, the zoning that we're seeing here. Yeah.
And so to come up with that, they had to look at ecosystems. What are critical ecosystems? How important are they? Do we give a 10 to the Maya Mountains because it's a watershed? Do we give a, it's not a 10, I think it's between 1 and 5, I believe, or 1 and 4. Do we give a 4 to the World Heritage Site because it's universally important? You would be surprised to find out that the World Heritage Site actually got a 2, while everything else 3 and 4. So it got one of the lowest ranking. And so immediately that made it open up to exploration.
Now, what did that ranking mean? What did the different ranking mean?
It meant that this place is really important, and so we'll give that higher ranking. And because when you add up the numbers, there's a range. So if you have between maybe 15 and 20, it falls into zone 1. If you have lesser than that, then it goes 2, 3, 4. And so that you start adding, when you start adding up the numbers for specific areas, that's how you get that zonation.
So we're going back to the zone map. Yeah, this is it. So, and that is essentially how the Maya Mountains was able to become an off-limit zone.
And there's an issue with that. For that to have happened, what they did was to double count that particular area. And we are figuring out that the reason why there's a double count for that area is because you can't access, if there's oil, you can't access in any way. And so to make the map more palatable to everybody, that area is off limits, all exploration.
So it's that it isn't a viable area to drill in. I mean, Bacalar Chico is also in a no drill zone or off limit zone.
That's the only area within the offshore you will note that is off limits to all exploration. And the reason why that ended up that way is that we have our forest reserve up there as well. Because of the counting, then it excluded from offshore oil exploration, but then you have very unique areas like your Blue Hole that is open up to all exploration.
Now the Blue Hole is located around where?
It's Half Moon.
Half Moon.
There are 2 marine protected areas which fall within a World Heritage Site. That's on Half Moon. So it's Blue Hole and Lighthouse.
And this is what we're looking. This is Turneff, and this is
Lighthouse.
Lighthouse. So we're looking at these. We're looking at the islands that are on the farthest right. On the screen, and those are the protected areas, some of the major protected areas that we're talking about. But really and truly, the position is simply that there should be no offshore drilling whatsoever.
There should be no offshore drilling whatsoever, and the research, the data shows that if you apply the correct buffers, that's the result that you will get. I am pleased that the government, I don't even know if it could say please, but it's a step forward that the government is now saying that 1, there is a moratorium, and 2, based on, I guess, the World Heritage Center's visit and the push that they have that you cannot have all concessions within the World Heritage Site, that's their statement now. I would want to see that reflected in the document starting. That should be the starting point.
Now, what does that mean? Because once the conversation got started once again about offshore drilling, the government issued a press release stating exactly that, reminding us of the 2013 arrangements where they were able to get they negotiated Princess Petroleum to relinquish some of the areas that were of concern, and also speak about the moratorium. But what does the moratorium mean in the context of the proposed zones?
I will start with Princess first. It was a victory for us of sort to see that government had negotiated with Princess to relinquish from Lighthouse. That was important. But on the other hand, government has also been giving Princess extensions onto their concession. If they had not been giving them an extension, by now they would have relinquished the concession area anyway. So it's almost like a give and a take. In terms of the moratorium now, they talk about doing a comprehensive study. If this is what is considered to be a comprehensive study before they actually allow oil exploration or to give up more permits, then we're in a very bad place. I was going to say something else. We're in a very, very bad place because this document cannot be the basis upon which we do oil exploration in Belize. Just cannot.
Is zoning a move in the right direction?
It definitely is, because before we were just giving out all concessions. There's agreed, and we're just giving out all concessions to whomever wanted. At least now there is a process. I must say that there is a process that is being taken to look at the country and to determine where the important areas. But this process is lacking in major areas.
Now, when you talk about that, what would you like to see in terms of the way the zones are being created?
We must really look at critical ecosystems as well as resource use, because they don't look at tourism and they don't look at fishing. Those are the backbone of this country. When you talk about the economic development of this country, there's a backbone, and you're foregoing those areas for a pie in the sky. Basically, you don't know what you have. For us, what we want to see is that you take those into serious account. You look at issues such as putting buffers around the critical ecosystems. If you do that, I think then you can have a proper plan in place.
Now, a lot of the releases that have come out of government have been more to kind of placate the general population, because I don't think it has worked with the NGO community. Now, how do you engage the general population to let them see that even though the wording, for example, of the press releases might say, don't worry, we're taking care of this, this is just a draft. How do you let the general population know that this is something that you cannot fall asleep on, that pressure must be brought to bear on government to make sure that they do the right thing going forward?
The good thing that we have for us is that when it comes to the offshore, people have a very strong position.
Yeah.
It's no. And so for us to show them a draft, show them this document that is saying, government is still saying yes, that helps to keep people engaged. And I think because of that issue, that's why you see people are now engaged again. And I think Belizeans don't take lightly somebody telling them not to worry, you know. That's when people normally start worrying. That's my general opinion. And like I said before, because we have that basis where people are already saying no to offshore exploration, it helps us to keep them engaged and to make them very wary of anything that says don't worry but is going against their position. I think immediately it creates a red flag for people in their brain. So you're telling me not to worry, but my opinion is no, but you're showing me yes. You're not convincing me.
Can we talk specifically about some of the guidelines that are now in place, looking at the different zones? One of them that we found very interesting, and I think off the bat if you read it, it seems promising, which is the consultation process with NGO stakeholders and environmental organizations in terms of, is it zone 3?
It's all of them. I think 2, 3, and 4.
Well, the white part is that's open, and then the seasonal is in consultation. But I know specifically when it comes to
number 2,
the zone number 2, it has to do with consulting with the organizations who are against it in the first place. What are your thoughts on that?
If we look at the process that we're going through right now and issues that we have with this process, and yet the public is hearing that they're consulting, can you have any faith in that consultation process to say go ahead or not to go ahead with oil exploration within these zones? I don't think I don't have faith in the consultation process if this is how we're going to consult. Honestly, I don't see it. Secondly, government still has the legal mandate to go ahead, even if those who they have consulted say no. Even if they're co-managers of protected areas, they don't have the legality to say I said no, so you need to listen to me. They don't have it. They're just co-managers.
And that was one of the things that I had wondered about. Is it perhaps a move in the right direction to say that these entities would have to be in full agreement to be able to allow for a contract or a concession in a particular area?
I would say full agreement or
majority,
something in that line. For us, for the offshore, there always been no. So there's no need for us to, in terms of consultation. We have no problem in sharing the science and sharing the data, because I know this Ministry of Energy has stated that it will be science and data driven, and I would hope that it is, because right now it is not necessarily so as we see it. But as I said, in our case, when it comes to the offshore, it will always be no. We do welcome consultation, true and meaningful consultation. For a long time in this country, consultation has meant I just have to talk to you, I say consult with you, and I move on with what I want to do. So if there's true and meaningful consultation, then sure, we are open and willing to participate.
Now, it's interesting because as you spoke about the idea of consultation, but even if it's a resounding no from those that are consulted, that government can still proceed. And you look at examples of like what happened down south.
EIA process, perfect example.
Because they use that as one of the main scientific tools to say that, listen, we've conducted an EIA and it says blah, 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 and we can proceed. Is that a part of the process that is worrisome, given the fact that the way EIAs are not only conducted but also processed by the government entities?
It is very worrisome. The environmental impact assessment process needs a serious overhaul. There must be some independent nature to that process. Right now it falls underneath the Ministry of Forestry and Fisheries and Sustainable Development. The majority of the people on that committee comes from government. There is no way as a junior staff that you will tell your minister or tell your CEO, I'm going to vote against your position on a particular project. So that's one thing. It needs an overhaul. I have little confidence in that process, to be very honest with you. Having been part of that process, I have little confidence in that process. That is not a process where you can say, okay, this is an opportunity for you to seriously look at a project and perhaps we will turn back that project, because it's not something that fits into the environmental direction of this country. If it's a project that has reached that phase, it means that all of the backdoor talking has already occurred and that project will go through.
That was one of the, I think it's a very important point, because we don't speak about it enough. We have seen multiple examples of where EIAs have not necessarily met the standards of even the general public, non-scientific persons. I think the NCL consultation was a spot-on example of that, and there have been many others. But then it goes to the NIAC, and as you mentioned, it's a very difficult position for members of the NIAC to be able to turn down these particular documents. Is that perhaps a new direction that needs to be taken, that if we will get into this area, this issue of zoning and ensuring that criteria are met, including an EIA, that there is pressure put on ensuring that a legitimate assessment of environmental impact is done?
That's definitely not only as it relates to petroleum, but in terms of overall development within the country. So definitely from our point of view, the environmental impact assessment process there has to be a serious overhaul of that process for us to have any confidence that process will seriously look at the impacts from petroleum. We have made comments on different EIAs for petroleum exploration onshore. We have not seen those comments reflected any at all in any amendments to those documents. Even in terms of the process itself, if I recall down south when they had this consultation process that ended up with a threat to arrest one of our NGO partners, the process needs some serious overhaul, and until then I don't see most NGOs, I don't see most communities who have been affected by developments that come through that process having confidence in that process.
Now, when you look at the way most of these consultations actually take place, it should be an opportunity for sober conversations concerning a genuine issue. The consultation itself, people have an issue with. Again, what would you like to see happen in terms of consultations? Because I think people are becoming kind of jaded with the whole idea that it puts you in a personal kind of confrontational situation, as opposed to just soliciting the opinions of people in the room. it's not the way that it's managed generally. What would you like to see, or your organization like to see, with the way consultations themselves are conducted?
It has to be that, I'm not sure what process you're talking about, just general process, that people who are there must be neutral. They're not supposed to be trying to guide the discussion into one general area. You're there to consult, so you must be very neutral and be open to the discussion that people who are there are bringing to you. The second thing is you must also reflect at least some of the recommendations that those who you're consulting with, you've invited to consult with. Your your process must reflect some of the recommendations. It can't be that everybody's recommendation is full of nonsense. It cannot be, and only my position is the right position. Yeah. That cannot be the case. So I would say that the people who are handling consultations, they need to be very neutral, and your process must then reflect that consultation process that you've gone through.
I see consultations in Belize more becoming in defense of my project, versus finding out the different input that organizations and even people who don't necessarily have the evidence or the data, their natural emotions to it as well, that they're not taken into account. So it is a part of what is integrated in this particular draft, and if we can identify flaws within those systems, it would be just passing on those very same issues. So let's look at some of the other areas within the draft guidelines that are of serious concern to you. You mentioned the ranking. We've obviously talked about the zoning, the lack of faith in the processes that are being put as good measures. What other areas are of serious concern?
It's funny that we talked about the EI process, but not even the EI process is mentioned in the guidelines, for example, for seismic and other studies that they would want to do. And their potential impact, especially when you look at transitional zones, the zones between land and the sea, they're serious impacts. But that even the EI process, with all its fault, that is not even mentioned as part of the steps that must be taken. So that's one of the things that were highlighted. The other issue that must be also, again, reiterated within the document is that because the companies who come to Belize are very small companies, they must ensure that they're bonded, that they have the finances in case anything goes wrong, and that must also be reflected within the guidelines. So those are some of the issues which we have not covered that I think needs to be within the guidelines. There are some issues with offshore as well, where there are question marks within the documents indicating that they're not sure how, in terms of depths, etc., what we're supposed to do. You should at least make a recommendation to the people you're consulting with, and let us then decide and discuss if what you're recommending is supposed to be what should be.
You're touching a really important point that probably we haven't discussed enough, which is what are currently the guidelines for an oil company to be able, what kind of guarantee do they have to offer us if there is a spill? Whose responsibility is it? Who will foot the bill for it?
Each company that comes to Belize should have a bond. So there must be a bond in place that if there's a spill, that they can help to pay for that spill. But the government will still be responsible as well. However, when you talk about spills, there's not even a national oil spill contingency plan in place. If you know that the Department of Environment was just restarting that process, so even when it comes to the bond, even though there is a bond, okay, what will happen when there's a spill? There's no plan in place. So there will be some mass confusion at some point if there is an oil spill. But each company should have a bond that the government can access if there's an oil spill. But we have never, the documents that we have not been able to note how much is that bond for each company.
So it's an undisclosed amount?
To us it is, yes.
One of the other things has been that they've also said that the guidelines meet international standards. Is it worrisome that those standards are not being spelled out as well?
There are many international standards. It is worrisome, but it also allows for some flexibility as well. For example, like there's API and there's other standards. It allows for some flexibility based on your context, your country context. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily worrisome. It's just that it must be valid and it must be based on science and data. That is our position. So I think it allows for some flexibility instead of indicating right off the bat what standards you're using.
With the recent visit from the World Heritage Center, do you think that brings this even more to the forefront in terms of what government needs to articulate when it comes to those areas?
Definitely. If you note, right after the World Heritage Center's visit, the Prime Minister said that the World Heritage Site will be off limits to oil exploration and adjacent area, which I would love for the government to identify what adjacent means. Because if they're talking about buffers, which is what the World Heritage Center is talking about, buffers, then it falls right back into what we've been saying, that you must put buffers around these critical ecosystems, but that makes the offshore off limits. So I'm interested to see what adjacent areas mean when it comes to the World Heritage. So it has had an impact, but those are words, and I don't believe in words. I want to see it written. Even when it's written, they can go against it, but at least if there's a written policy regarding that particular statement, I think it's a step forward. But we still need to go that extra mile and make the area off limits oil exploration. As
always, it boils down to semantics, because while there's a promise of not working, not drilling in World Heritage sites, the areas around it can also directly impact these sites itself, and that's what I wanted to move into next. A while back we had, I believe with the coalition, some demonstrations as to what could potentially happen in the event of a small to major oil spill. Can we talk about that once again, why it is important that although if we're looking at the map that these areas are all the way over here, that it makes no sense to drill anywhere
if you think
off
about
the coast.
Sorry, if you think about the marine environment, it's a very dynamic environment. You have currents moving. Based on the current profile that we've done and many other organizations have done, within 2 days of a small spill, the entire country will be covered, the entire offshore will be covered in oil. So even though you're saying this particular area, it's almost like you're trying to, you're isolating something that cannot be isolated. It's water. You can't decide, okay, I'm going to, because this particular site is isolated, we won't do anything here. If there's a spill, we will divert it away from that particular site. That is ridiculous.
It's not a roadway.
It's not a roadway. It's not. You're not on land. So the whole premise of that is something that is very faulty. The whole thought behind that is faulty. You cannot isolate an oil spill in the marine environment. And for you to prevent what you're trying to prevent, you're saying that I want to preserve this World Heritage Site, then you must make the whole area off limits.
So in 2 days, the current would have it?
2 days, the current would have it covered. And it takes about 2 days before Clean Caribbean, which is the one oil spill company that has been contracted to deal with any oil spill in Belize. It will take 2 days for them to get their resources together, to get their people together and come to the country to start working on the oil spill. In country, we don't even have enough resources to deal with an oil spill. Remember, we don't even have a plan.
Now, one of the things that I find interesting in looking at globally some of the debates that have happened, government is not necessarily it's caught in the middle. It's usually those who are the big businesses who are promoting the drilling, and then those who are advocates for the development. But putting government, and with government being in the center and having the legislative power to do so many things despite what the consultation, do you think it's a kind of engagement or the conversation that promotes a fair resolution in the end?
At the end of the day, William, government is responsible for the people of Belize. They have been voted in as an administration to govern the country, to create legislation for the long term, for the future of this country. So at the end of the day, it's their responsibility to ensure that whatever development takes place, look at the economic, cultural, and environmental development of this country and protection of its people. So I would never ever excuse government from out of the discussion. I think when it comes to engagement, I think there is the tendency to believe that we're government, we've been elected. You don't have a say, almost. You don't have a say. At the end of the day, I've been elected for 5 years. What are you to tell us what to do? Some of the attitude prevail. I hope that it is in the past. I hope that this consultation process, how we're going about in the media, talking about the faults within the consultation process, that it's taken heed of, and if the process is fixed, that there is this open discussion that I really do want to hear what you have to say. You and I don't share the same position, but I want to hear what you have to say. I want to see what you can present to me in terms of data, and perhaps I can look again at what I've prepared and perhaps make some changes.
The reason why I raise that point, is because globally, especially with companies who are global in their scope, you have an opportunity to bring global pressure to bear on that company. But there is a back door out for a lot of the companies because they don't become a part of the conversation. Not until the very, very end, and it's very minimal. Now, how do you use that bargaining power that globally is one of the NGOs or the pro-conservation groups' only tool in terms of, whether it's flooding their website or getting other citizens from other countries who share similar to boycott their products or to do something for that particular company. That's something that we don't have in the way the engagement happens now.
There's a reason behind that. There's not a shell here. There is not any big companies here. They're very small companies. We bring treaty that's now being charged in the U.S. by the Security Exchange Commission because of fraud. That's the kind of companies we have here. So there's no pressure to be borne on any international companies. And that's the difficulty. You have these, we call them fly-by-night companies. Some of them are just speculating. They're trying to attract somebody to buy up their concessions. So that pressure that normally would exist, it doesn't exist. The pressure that we have to pressure now is government. When we look at bringing on international pressure, it has to go directly to the government because that doesn't exist. There is no large multinational company, which is a good thing on one end. That doesn't exist, so you cannot pressure the companies. The companies are small companies.
One of the conversations we had earlier this week was with the tourism board, speaking about, and they have said that their master plan says, that they do not advocate for offshore drilling. And we know very well that the implications for tourism are ones that we speak about a lot, but we haven't necessarily focused on, and we've spoken about the reef and the impact on the status of the World Heritage Site, but there are also the marine environment and the resources, the fisheries product that a number of people are very reliant on for their own livelihood and also to economic development. So there's a map that shows our natural resources with some pink areas, guys. So if we can get that up, that really gives an idea of what natural resources are at stake. This one, yeah. So let's talk about that, Tanya.
Definitely, as I mentioned before, these are things that weren't really, for us, it wasn't really taken into context when they look at the zonation, developing those particular zones. You have, for example, spanning aggregations which have a lesser ranking than onshore areas. Spanning aggregations were created. There are specific areas that were created to protect very important fisheries. For example, I forgot the name of the particular. I was going to say jewfish.
The grouper.
Grouper.
The NASA grouper.
For NASA grouper.
Yeah.
For the NASA grouper. Very critical to the economy of the country. So those were not really taken into a particular context. Then you have conch spawning, another important fisheries for Belize's economy, even though we have issues in terms of working on the population of conch in Belize. So there are resources that were really and seriously not taken into context when that zonation was done. You'll notice that there are little grids around them because we try to create a buffer for those particular areas, but they're just buffers because of seismic activity. So this particular map shows buffers just for seismic activity. We're not even talking about the actual production of oil.
And we have sea turtles.
We have sea turtles as well.
The coral reef, which I think we understand. Conch.
Yeah. And then American crocodile, which is an endangered species in Belize, but it wasn't considered for the zonation. An endangered species that is critical for you in terms of your resources within your marine area.
And our manatees.
And manatees. Even the information that was presented on manatees, we asked them to, then we look again on surveys because what was presented in terms of the population of manatees, right away when we looked at it, we knew it was incorrect. So I'm hoping again, and they keep saying that they've gotten some information, so I'm hoping again that the next draft after March 22nd reflects information that's been sent over and over and over again.
So Tanya, what happens now? What are you compiling to a document to send once again your recommendations and comments?
We are once again sending what we've been sending for a while. But beyond that, we are trying as much as possible to engage the public, to have them to understand what is within this donation framework, and to get them again to understand why we have been saying no all along to offshore oil exploration. Remind people of what they did 2 years ago, the importance of protecting our offshore from oil. So we have actually started, and we've started with working with a lot of other NGOs on a campaign, and that includes, so we're doing selfies, if you notice, on Facebook. We're asking people to show their displeasure with the fact that government is still talking about offshore oil exploration in Belize. And so people can go on the Say No to Offshore Oil Exploration Facebook and Instagram page, take your selfie. You can even remind them of what you voted for in 2012.
Now, just before we wrap, is there any way for the John and Jane public to actually see the changes or the concerns that you have reflected in terms of a print or online component, to see what is the draft and what are the input that has been proposed by the coalition?
They can go to our website at belizecoalition.org or our Facebook page at Belize Coalition. Those documents are there on our website and Facebook page. As I said before, we are doing public education regarding this particular document, looking at the recommendations that we've made, what are improvements that can be made to the document, and again, like I said before, reminding people of why we've been saying no all along to offshore exploration. The research analysis, we didn't do anything to this. This is somebody totally separate from the coalition that did this document. He actually works with the oil companies to do environmental impact assessments. So this is not us trying to forge anything. Take a look at the document and you will recognize that the science is there. What we've been saying along the science is there. I also want to encourage people to participate in the activities that we're having, because it's a campaign that we're doing. Coalition, Oceana, and other organizations. It's a campaign that we're doing to remind people again what they voted for in 2012, to remind the government of the people's position when it comes to offshore oil exploration in Belize.
All right. So be sure to take your selfie and post it online to show your support, and get that momentum going once again in the Say No to Offshore Drilling campaign. Thank you, Tanya, for joining us. And of course, on the technical side, we look forward to after March and see what happens once these comments have been submitted. Right.
Thank you very much.
We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, it's a talk about the Gift of Life program, so stay tuned.